Today, we're fabricating front seat track support brackets. The front seat track supports are located under the floor pans and act as a reinforcement bracket for the tracks on the front seat to connect to. Without these, the front two bolts on the front seat would connect only to the floor pan and would most likely tear through eventually. Despite being an essential part of the structure, these brackets were really good at capturing debris and moisture, resulting in them just rotting away. The first step is to create a cardboard template. This was considerably more difficult than it would seem, since there wasn't much of these brackets left to work with. I transferred the template to 18 gauge sheet metal. The originals were significantly thinner than 18 gauge, so this should be an improvement. I cut out the sheet metal shape and transferred my markings for where the bends needed to be, making note of which direction each bend needed to go as well, since these are not symmetrical. There's a left and a right side bracket that are mirror images of each other. I don't have a proper sheet metal brake, so I had to make do with what I have. I clamped the sheet metal in between two pieces of angle iron. I bend it over by leaning on it and hammering it into shape. This method, although crude, is effective. Relief cuts were made so that flanges could be bent. Here's the original next to the one that we fabricated up. You can see I went and duplicated this detail on the new one. The flanges on the other side are fairly accurate. So the only thing left to do now is to recreate this support. I started by taking painter's tape and getting the outline of the shape for the remaining bracket that needed to be fabricated. Transferred this to cardboard so that I could cut the shape from sheet metal and make the first two bends. Once I was good with these dimensions, I just had to bend up the flanges on the edge of the bracket. I was able to get measurements off the original to determine where the support belonged. I marked that out and plug welded it into place. I also welded up the little relief cuts at the end of the support. So there, that is one complete bracket support. Fortunately, there was enough of the bracket left from the passenger side to get all this done, because this is what is left of the bracket on the driver's side. Not a whole lot to go on there. Now that we have our piece all made up, it's time to see how it fits in. This fits pretty well flush up against the bottom of the floor. We'll drill some holes from the other side in order to plug weld this in place. We'll have to drill some holes in the flange as well for plug welding to the inner rocker. I think it's a good thing that we had that spotlight on underneath, because there are plenty of pinholes that need to be welded up before we weld that bracket in place. Well, what I thought was going to be a pretty straightforward task of welding up some pinholes turned into a 6 or 8 hour ordeal of welding and grinding and hammering and dollying, and after finally getting everything all sorted out, I think we're ready now to drill some holes for the plug welds and get our seat support welded in. I needed to figure out where each of the spot welds were going to go once it was in the car. I was able to pretty much determine where they were supposed to be from the old bracket and pieces of the floor pan that I had cut out. After drilling the holes for the plug welds in the floor pan, I marked out on the track support bracket where the welds would go so that I could mask off these areas before painting. The piece was masked off and prepped for paint. I originally thought I would just paint it up with a brush and save myself the trouble of cleaning out my spray gun. But as you can see, this looks terrible. So I shot it again with another coat of Zero Rust from the gun. And the underside of the floor pan was shot with a coat of Zero Rust as well. Finally, some weld-through primer before welding everything in. I positioned my floor jack underneath the bracket to hold it in place tight against the floor pan. I then used self-tapping screws to hold it in place. I plug welded the bracket in place from the top side, removing the self-tapping screws as I go along. All of the plug welds were ground flat before focusing our attention on the underneath side. After hammering the flanges tight against the inner rocker, they were plug welded in. So there you have it. One front seat track support fabricated and welded in place. Another one just like this one was made for the other side. Hope you enjoyed our video. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below.